You're about to learn something important. One of the best ways to tell if your leaders have intellectual grit of their own is to see how they've evolved over the decades. In that case, I think the clip that you're about to watch of Donald Trump all the way back in 1988 with Oprah Winfrey shows a strikingly similar kernel to Trump's politics as you see today. There's also some vital contrast I need to give you with Joe Biden because I just dug up some rare clips of him stating positions that he would rather you forget. But before I show you that, watch this segment from nearly 4 decades ago.
You took out a full-page ad in major U.S. newspapers last year criticizing U.S. foreign policy. What would you do differently, Donald?
I'd make our allies, forgetting about the enemies you can't talk to so easily, I'd make our allies pay their fair share. We're a debtor nation. Something's going to happen over the next number of years with this country because you can't keep going on losing $200 billion, and yet we let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They don't have laws against it. They just make it impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. And, hey, I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. I mean, you can respect somebody that's beating the hell out of you, but they are beating the hell out of this country. Kuwait, they live like kings. The poorest person in Kuwait, they live like kings. And yet they're not paying. We make it possible for them to sell their oil. Why aren't they paying us 25% of what they're making? It's a joke.
And it's that theory of trade protectionism that you eventually saw part of his policy on foreign trade as president 3.5 decades later. It's really a revelation to see a connecting line between his policy positions on trade today versus when he had no political ambitions at all. But even more so than that, I think there's a core to Donald Trump as a businessman that's consistent throughout, and that's his sheer aversion to ever being ripped off one way or another. Even if his writing, you see him talk about how he treats everything like a deal, and he's always had this trait of almost being paranoid at being taken advantage of unfairly. Now sure, it did lead to a heating up of trade wars in his regime with countries like China and France, but perhaps it's just that attitude that eventually cools things down. I think this next clip demonstrates that example perfectly.
Macron, do you know Macron? He's a very nice guy, Macron. And really a very nice guy. I said, Emmanuel, how are you? He said, fine. I said, I heard you're going to charge American companies 25% to do things in Mexico. Who else are you doing? Well, nobody yet, but we will do other. I said, no, but you're not going to do it, Emmanuel. You're not going to, no, Donald, it has already passed. I said, well, you better unpass it. Because if you don't unpass it, you're going to pay a 100% tariff on all wines and champagnes that are shipped into the United States starting tonight. No, you cannot do that, Donald. You cannot do that. I said, I can do that. In fact, I'm just signing it right now. No. Okay, Donald, look, okay, we're not going to do it.
Perhaps trade wars are better than actual wars, and it's certainly interesting how a leader that's as flippant as Donald Trump can paradoxically become a deterrent on the international front. That's what happened as well when Donald Trump placed a massive 10% tariff on $100 billion worth of Chinese goods after assuming office, and then a 25% tariff on the remaining $300+ billion worth of goods to equalize what he believed was an unfair trade balance with China. It is interesting the commonality of that thought as far back as 1988.
This sounds like political presidential talk to me, and I know people have talked to you about whether or not you want to run. Would you ever?
Probably not. But I do get tired of seeing the country ripped off.
Why would you not?
I just don't think I really have the inclination to do it. I love what I'm doing. I really like it.
Also, it doesn't pay as well.
No, it doesn't. But, I just probably wouldn't do it, Oprah. I probably wouldn't, but I do get tired of seeing what's happening with this country. And if it got so bad, I would never want to rule it out totally because I really am tired of seeing what's happening with this country, how we're really making other people live like kings and we're not.
Well, that's at least one thing that turned out different, and probably for the better for Donald Trump. There's 1,000 different things that can be said about him, but there's perhaps a high pride and ego about himself that translates into American pride when he's at the helm of the country. Whether that's healthier for him or the country is a separate debate, but seeing him say it like he sees it and calling out people or entire countries seems to be a common thread in his evolution over the decades. But even more so, that ego and pride to him lends a kind of self-confidence that looks delusional from the outside looking in, and that's exactly what someone may have thought about Donald Trump outright saying he'd win the presidency if he tried, despite admitting he had no plans to do so at the time.
You've said, though, that if you did run for president, you believe you'd win.
Well, I don't know. I think I'd win. I tell you what, I wouldn't go in to lose. I've never gone in to lose in my life. And if I did decide to do it, I think I'd be inclined, I would say that I would have a hell of a chance of winning, because I think people, I don't know how your audience feels, but I think people are tired of seeing the United States ripped off. And I can't promise you everything, but I can tell you one thing, this country would make one hell of a lot of money from those people that for 25 years have taken advantage. It wouldn't be the way it's been, believe me.
Maybe it's that unshakable confidence that his voter base finds appealing, seeing a kind of authenticity even in his flippant ego that's more attractive than false humility or virtue signaling. When you've been in the public eye for more than 5 decades, you leave a pattern for people to see. And the longer the pattern, the harder it is to fake. Perhaps it's harder to say the same for the man currently in office, because you don't need to go too far to see a complete shift in many of his policy positions in what almost seems to be led by the changing tides of larger culture. Getting on with the times is important when it impacts your own life, and that's why diversifying into precious metals with the help of Birch Gold is the best choice you can make. So click the link in the description or text the word FFIRA to 989898 to learn more. Now take this for example on patterns of opinion. I think it's very easy to forget what Joe Biden used to say on the issue of gay marriage in his vice presidency not too long ago, before flipping and going along with the tide of the time.
We are desperately concerned about the circumstance relating to avian flu. We don't have enough vaccines. We don't have enough police officers. And we're going to debate the next 3 weeks, I'm told, gay marriage, a flag amendment, and God only knows what else. I can't believe the American people can't see through this. We already have a law, the Defense of Marriage Act, where we've all voted, not where I voted and others said, look, marriage is between a man and a woman, and states must respect that. Nobody's violated that law. There's been no challenge to that law. Why do we need a constitutional amendment? Marriage is between a man and a woman. What's the game going on here?
Let's try to avoid nuance, Senator. Do you support gay marriage?
No. Barack Obama nor I support redefining from a civil side what constitutes marriage. We do not support that.
Now, of course, some might say it's simply an evolution of his true thought that happened in the span of a few years, and maybe that's true. But looking from the point of view of the electorate, perhaps it really does look like Joe Biden changes himself to fit in, rather than stand his intellectual ground and convince the culture around him to do the same. Someone that not too long ago stood firmly against redefining marriage to include gay couples now invites transgender influencers like Dylan Mulvaney to the White House just for how good he knows that would look to a certain segment of his base. We saw something similar in a much more serious context when he apologized for calling the illegal immigrant who ended Laken Riley's poor life as illegal. Just take a look for yourself.
During your response to her heckling of you, you used the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Laken Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. And look, when I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country. The reason our economy is growing. We have to control the border and more orderly flow, but I don't share his view at all.
So you regret using that word?
Yes.
Can you really blame people for being confused on whether it's truly his own thoughts he has instead of plucking from the culture whatever he believes would look good on his resume? Joe Biden and Donald Trump are both very different characters, and that is something that we can talk about all day. But perhaps these clips reveal at least one trait that makes Biden and Trump viewed very differently by the American voter base.